Hello everybody and welcome once again to this training video. We've been looking at leadership and the very different and important aspects of leadership. Today we're going to come up against one that is, I suspect, one of the most difficult for the majority of leaders. It's the most challenging and requires perhaps the greatest skill, both of listening and acting. But it's such an important skill because, quite honestly, your leadership is on the line if you cannot handle this particular skill, if you cannot embrace it and use it effectively and efficiently, sensitively and with appropriate care, because your team is going to be looking at you to see how you behave, how you deal with it, and how you resolve it. And that issue is handling conflict. How do you handle conflict? Well, maybe let's start with something simple. Those of us who are parents, we know what conflict is. Either we've been part of it with our siblings, or we've had to deal with it as parents. Now, handling conflict in a family environment has some tools that are fantastic for later life. But trust me when I say that leaving your home and going to the office is light years away. It's light years away because, firstly, you are dealing with adults. So whether you run a small business, you're head of department, you're a C-suite individual, top executive, whatever your role, maybe it's a team or a project that you run, how have you dealt with conflicts? How have you handled them? Have they been successful? Have they been disastrous? Well, my name is Igwe and I'm a global leader in the retail real estate sector. For the past 35 years across different countries, I've experienced, but created, developed, grown amazing teams. And through those, inevitably, there have been conflicts. There have been situations to handle and problems to deal with. So we're going to delve for a few minutes into how you handle conflict. Now, I don't know if any of you remember, those of us old enough to remember, a fantastic movie which was called The Negotiator, with Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey, both of them hostage negotiators. Now, the movie itself is fantastic. I won't steal the story, but I recommend that you watch it. But the key thing for me there is the word negotiator. Spacey had to use all his knowledge, insights, ability to listen, to discover who, what, where, how, why, and find a solution to what was a very complex and literally life-threatening situation. Handling conflict is about negotiation. It's not about negotiating with clients or maybe with your team internally to get them to do or perform in a certain way. It's not the fun side, as it were, of what we do as leaders. It's often the side that could break you. Now, the one important thing to remember in any handling of conflict, the very important fundamental, is essentially you have two people. It could be more, but generally it is two people who have a problem. It could be more in the sense that there could be one individual in that team or that department that is causing mayhem by his or her behavior. But let's remember, fundamentally, conflicts arise out of ego, jealousy, lack of promotion, lack of conformity to a certain way in which the business should be run, economic aspects, maybe competing for revenue, sales, bonuses, and a whole host of others in that line. So conflicts are generated by human beings interacting, often in a way that is rather aggressive, and one or the other tries to impose his or her law, as it were, on the others. Now, it could be as a leader you say to yourself, let them figure it out. I don't want to, I don't need to. That is escaping the inevitable train wreck that is going to happen, because it will. Not only between those individuals, but also with the team or department and how they see you as a leader. So what are some of the things that you need to remember? Well, the first is you need to take time. Set time aside to deal with the problem. You can't do it in between meetings, between traveling, projects. There's always something going on. You have to carve out in your agenda time to deal with conflict. And I'm going to give you some very specific aspects. Now, these aspects are pretty straightforward, but they require some delving into. The first is ground rules. You have to establish the ground rules. So before we do that, the problem has occurred, you have difficulty between a couple of individuals. We'll make it two because it's easier to handle. Right up here would be set up a meeting. So you set up that meeting, you bring the individuals into the meeting, and before you start the meeting, you set out the ground rules. You basically want to acknowledge that there's a problem, there's an issue between the two parties. It needs to be dealt with, and to be dealt with efficiently. The process in this meeting and how that's going to roll, and then what you want afterwards. So you set that out so that everybody understands what the rules are. The next one, which is really important, is you allow each person to speak. One person speaks, another person speaks. And as far as the ground rules are concerned, you remind them that when one is speaking, the other doesn't speak, just listens. Each person speaks and says what the problem is, how it arose, and maybe some examples. It's important that you hear how, when, and have some examples, because that will then give you an idea of, when the other person speaks, whether they have a different concept of the conflict. Allow each one to speak. You're just facilitating this process. This is where you come in. You then repeat what you've heard them both say. That's vitally important. Why is it important? Because it's easy to be listening. And if you're not a great listener, in other words, you're getting really down to the subject of, your mind is not wandering, you're trying to focus on what is being said. If they have both spoken and you have missed something, it's important that you repeat. You repeat what you heard each one say. And then, and here's the key thing, you ask each one, have I understood correctly? Have I understood correctly what you have just said and what I believe the problem is? If the answer is yes, you've heard correctly, it's fine, great, you move on. If it's not what they wanted to say, ask him or her, whichever or both, to repeat it. And then you do the same thing. You must make sure that this circle is fully completed before anybody leaves the room. And then the final point is you suggest a solution. Maybe in that meeting, you've already got a solution, in which case you air it with them and get their buy-in, as it were. If there isn't a solution, you say, we will be able to resolve this problem, and either you have to go away and think about it and come back, or you can suggest some thoughts during that meeting. Now, for this to all flow, the thing is you have to have done your homework. So your homework is basically understanding the problem, understanding where you believe it arose, why you believe it arose, and equally importantly, if you have a PA or a trusted individual in the team who you know is very confidential, ask him or her. They will give you insights. I used to have my PA give me information and insights so that I could bear in mind maybe aspects I hadn't seen or they hadn't shown me or wouldn't show me during this process. So once you've gathered all the information, you can then make a decision around how that should be resolved and in what time frame. So that is a very important process in handling and managing conflict. Now you might say, well, that's great, but does it work? I will say it works most of the time. As I said, you're dealing with people. We are complex beings. Just when you think you've resolved something, it may not work. I've had situations where two managers in a department were going at it. We had to figure out a solution. It didn't work in the end. One person decided he was going to leave. I've had a secretary who wanted more from her role in the team and wasn't happy with the fact that we couldn't change much, but she had to adjust. She eventually left. I could go on. There are many other examples. But probably for me, the one that's stuck and sticks most in my mind, that you can't resolve everything, but then you have to find a way in which you can deal with it, was when I specifically had a conflict with an individual in my team. She was a brilliant chief designer. We were working on a very complex project. I'd been brought in by the chairman, who hired me into what was probably the European number 2 in that sector in the industry at the time. Because I was parachuted in and the other guy was moved to another role, she wasn't exactly thrilled. I didn't know her, she didn't know me. But I needed her and she needed me. We had to find a way to work together in the best possible way. Now, bear in mind, I tried everything to bring her over to my side, as it were. We had, I think it was just one lunch in the end, because she wasn't up for lunches to discuss anything. I gave her flowers for her birthday. I gave her boxes of chocolates when she did a great job. None of it melted her heart or broke her down. I soon realized that there was nothing I was going to do to change her, but I had to, or change me for that matter, to find a way to work together. But we just got to a mutual level of respect and trust. Although she never said it to me, I know that she admired what I did, because the rest of the design team I had good relationships with. But at the same time, she was absolutely brilliant, and the project we worked on is a reference in the industry. So there are some people who you're not going to win over, but you have to find a way in which you can then work amicably or as best you can for the betterment of the team and for the project. But having said that, if you do approach handling conflicts with a structured, thoughtful process, you will get to a solution and resolution. But handling conflicts is one of the great leadership skills that needs to be acquired. Not the most fun part, not the greatest part. And the consequences, if you can't reach agreement, might simply be that person or those people have to leave, or maybe you choose to move on and do something else. If this video has spoken to you and you've enjoyed some of the information noted in it, click on the link, do stay in contact, subscribe to this channel, and identify the notifications so you know when our new videos are coming up. But we certainly hope that you've enjoyed it and look forward to staying connected. Thank you.